There's a saying that a film is born 3 times. Once when it's written, again when it's shot, and finally when it's edited. This has definitely been true of every project I've done, but it's never been truer for a project than Remains. Originally, Remains was a completely different script. It was called Mercy, and it had no urn, had no baby. It was completely unrecognizable from the final product. It was going to be the biggest project I'd ever done. And after months of writing, rewriting, casting, location scouting, I woke up to an email 2 days before the shoot saying that one of our 2 lead actors had COVID. At first I thought this isn't as big a deal as it may seem. We can maybe recast, we can maybe change the shooting dates. But as is the case with a lot of things in filmmaking, there are some things out of your control, and we simply couldn't rearrange and maneuver with the circumstances. So I either had to completely scrap the project and not do a project at all, or repurpose the materials. And I say a lot, work with what you have, create stuff around the resources you have. So I was forced to kind of follow my own advice. I knew we could still make a movie. There had to be a story that could work with those resources out of the remains of Mercy.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
I knew it wasn't going to be the biggest and likely not the best thing I was ever going to create, but it would be something. And that's most important sometimes.
And Jody, one sound. Can you do a smaller sound?
All right, so that's the background of how Remains came to be. Now I'm going to actually talk about how we made the thing. One of the biggest things that actually carried over from Mercy was our lead actress, Jenny Taylor. Jenny was thankfully totally on board to continue with this totally new project. And so after writing an initial draft, I sent it to her and we started talking about it over Zoom. Jenny is a wonderful actress, but she's also a screenwriter and she's done her own short films. So please check out some of her work in the description below. For those of you who are interested in the technical elements of the film, we shot the project on an Ursa Mini G2, and the lens we used for the entirety of the film was an Angenieux 30-90mm. After reorganizing, the crew shrank and some of us had to wear multiple hats. So for instance, Taylor, who on Mercy was our set designer, became also our DP for this project. Shout out to Taylor, because that is a big role to suddenly adopt, and she killed it. There were a number of important VFX shots in the film, but most of the VFX shots were actually of the baby monitor, and hopefully for a reason that you will not notice. I basically wanted as much control over the baby sounds in post as I could have. So what I did was we shot the baby monitor with no lights flaring, and Jenny was reacting to nothing, so kudos to her. And then in post, I just chose what those sounds would be, and I went ahead and I had to manually add the lights, the levels on the baby monitor to match the sounds that I chose. It gave me a lot more control over when it's flaring, how much it's flaring, what those sounds are that correspond with the flare. It just gave me more flexibility. Like most of the creatures in these shorts, the creature was a mix of practical and visual effects. A friend of mine named Will agreed to be the spooky guy in this one. Kudos to him, because that's not always the most fun role to have. The most important part of the creature to me were the hands, which we'd see a couple of times, and those I knew they had to look great. Not just because they're so important, but also because on Portrait of God, I wished we could do more with the hands, specifically the nails. So for this, I had my attention set on that. The most important shot that used the hands was this first shot where it's coming out of the urn. And this was actually super simple. All we did was have Will stand over the urn and pretend to place his hand at such an angle that it looks like it's coming out of it, when really his arm is just right behind the urn and he's standing right next to it. All I did was get a clean plate and erase him, and then it just looked like his hand was coming out of it. I was worried we were gonna have to, get a second urn and cut a hole in the back and have him like underneath of it, but sometimes there's simpler methods, and the simplest method can totally work. For these shots of her looking down into the urn, I made sure to darken the interior of the urn so it looked like there was this endless depth to it. Pretty easy tactics to make that work, just rotoscoping a mask and tracking it. This basement shot was a big one, and I knew we had to get the lighting just right. And on set, we couldn't. We just weren't quite able to dial it in the way we needed to. So I figured in post I could shape that lighting the way I wanted to and get it to look the way I had it in my head. And luckily I was right about that. Something about this basement stuff that I find funny is when people ask a horror creator if making a horror film is scary, the answer is quite often no.
Whoa! You're looking great.
It can be, and that's awesome. In this case, it was not. Usually, it is not. At the end of the film, when she's staring down into the urn and she's transfixed by it, the original effect was pretty different. I was hoping to have this kind of spiraling, almost hypnotic ash swirl that goes endlessly downwards. And I think it could have looked really cool, but we couldn't quite get the effect to work the way we wanted it to. So I ended up pushing it in a more abstract route, and that was this sort of formless glowing light that she's becoming transfixed by. Someone aptly pointed out that I seem to have a strange affinity for stories that end with teary-eyed protagonists staring off into glowing lights. Not planned, but that could be true.
Dylan, can I ask you to move? Dylan, can you get out of the way, actually? Get off this set.
One of the trickiest complications we faced on set was with this shot. We had a number of problems with this. Firstly, we had planned to buy 2 urns, one that would be broken ahead of time, so that after this shot, we would have the glued together urn already done. She wouldn't actually have to glue back the whole thing or anything. That would be wasting time on set. What happened was somehow a second urn didn't get purchased. So at the last minute, I was faced with the realization that we only had 1 urn. We only had 1 chance to get this shot. So our plan was to shoot it in order, where we would have Jenny actually destroying our urn, and then she would actually glue it back together, and we would basically do it exactly how it's presented in the script. But this happened. There was no way this thing was breaking. I mean, we really tried to shatter this thing, and it just was not happening. So we had to change our plan, and what we ended up doing was we controlled broke it with like a screwdriver and a hammer or something, and then filmed the ending first. We had her actually glue it back together, and then what she's throwing in the shot where she breaks it is the already shattered urn that's been glued back together. That way, when it hits the ground, it's this glued back together urn that falls apart really easily on impact. We only had 1 take to make this look good, and Jenny had a lot to bring to the shot because this is the emotional climax of the film as well. So there was a lot riding on this, and it was very tense as we pressed record, but Jenny absolutely crushed it. Ryan Shreves once again did the score for this one. For the making of Portrait of God, I showed what films I used to lay out the temp score for Ryan. So these are the movies I used as a temp score for Remains. Something that was important on the music side that I told Ryan early on was that I really wanted to find this lullaby that the toy would actually play, this toy that she holds and lights up. And that would kind of be the thread that weaves its way through the film. And we hear it at the very beginning, we hear it at the very end, and it's kind of interwoven throughout some of the creepier stuff as well. And Ryan really ran with that, and that was the first thing he composed and sent to me, and he based a lot of the rest of the score around that. As with every project I've worked on with Ryan, he killed it. So that's it. That's Remains. Not the short I expected to make, but the one I ended up with. And it's too bad Mercy didn't get to happen, but it's a great reminder that all the work for the unfinished or canceled projects that you do may feel wasted, but all the lessons, the successes, the failures that goes into those projects is going to make up the DNA of your successful projects, and it's going to do nothing but strengthen those projects. So keep working through it. Ignore the fact that you're creating a failure, because that is actually just part of a success that you haven't seen yet.
Rolling. Slate. Scene 3D, take 1.
Thank you so much for watching. As always, I really appreciate your support through 2023 and looking forward to sharing more stuff in 2024. Here's to a good year.